I'm an Orthodox Christian living on the banks of the Anchor River in Anchor Point, Alaska. Going to do some readings for us tonight again. If you want to support my small channel, it's just www.paypal.me/Pike A. The Last True Rebellion, the Radical Catacomb Teaching of Monk Seraphim Rose by Monk Damascene Christensen. It's all over for what was once known as Christian civilization. We're living in a post-Christian age. As the mad prophet Friedrich Nietzsche said, the 20th century will be the triumph of nihilism, and this triumph, said Monk Seraphim Rose, will end in a reign of anarchy. Nihilism is the means, anarchism is the end. Nihilism comes from the word nihil, meaning nothing. Nietzsche defined nihilism thus: there is no truth, there is no absolute state of affairs, no thing in itself. This alone is nihilism, and of the most extreme kind. Father Seraphim wrote that nihilism has become in our time so widespread and pervasive, has entered so thoroughly and so deeply into the minds and hearts of all men living today, that there is no longer any fount on which it may be fought, no front on which it may be fought. This is the mindset of modern society, and it is the wave of the future. But if abandonment of truth has become the mainstream, who then are the rebels? Not the nihilists who openly declare that life has no meaning and live as though it did not. They are only victims who have been devastated by the spirit of the times. The Christians, then, not if they've sold out into the world and well immersed in their slick, squeaky clean worldliness, act as if they're trying to stand for something otherworldly. No, the true rebels are those who by their deeds and lives spit on the falseness of the world, and on the mainstream of nihilism that refuses to see above this world. Such a rebel was Monk Seraphim Rose. Father Seraphim was born into a typical white middle-class Protestant family in San Diego in 1934. While growing up, he was the proverbial dutiful child and academic achiever. After high school, however, he began to passionately seek the answer to the question why. And not finding it in the society in which he had been raised, he began to rebel. He refused to accept the accepted answers. This was at the very beginning of the modern counterculture in the early 1950s. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Father Seraphim became a student of one of the counterculture's first pioneers, Alan Watts, whom he later realized was totally pseudo, and became a Buddhist bohemian in San Francisco. He learned ancient Chinese in order to study the Tao Te Ching and other ancient Eastern texts in their original language, hoping thereby to tap into their heart of their wisdom. By this time, he had wholly rejected the Protestant Christianity of his formative years, which he regarded as worldly, weak, and fake. He mocked its concept of God and said that it put God in a box. He read Nietzsche until that prophet's words began to resonate in his soul with an eclectic, infernal power. All this time he had been seeking the truth with his mind, but the truth had eluded him. He fell into a state of despair which he described in later years as a living hell. He felt that he did not fit into the modern world, even in his own family, who did not understand him. It was as if he had somehow been born out of place, out of time. He lived to roam under the stars, but he still felt that there was nothing out there to take him in, no God, nothing. The Buddhist nothingness left him empty, just as it did the founder of the Beat movement, Jack Kerouac. And like Kerouac, Father Seraphim turned to drink. He would drink wine voraciously and then would pound on the floor, screaming at God to leave him alone. Once, while drunk, he raised a fist to heaven from a mountaintop, cursed God, and dared him to send him to hell. In his despair, it seemed worth being damned forever by God's wrath, if only he could empirically know that God exists, rather than remain in a stagnant state of indifference. If God did damn him to hell, then at least he would, for that blissful instant, feel God's touch and know for sure that he was reachable. Who has killed God? You and I. We are all his murderers, but how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon? What did we do when we loosed this earth from its sun? Whither does it now move? Away from all suns? Do we not dash on unceasingly, backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there an above and a below? Do we not stray into infinite nothingness? Does not the night come on continually darker and darker? Friedrich Nietzsche. Atheism, Father Seraphim wrote in later years, true existential atheism, burning with hatred of a seemingly unjust or unmerciful God, is a spiritual state. It is a real attempt to grapple with the true God, whose ways are so inexplicable even to the most believing of men. And it has more than once been known to end in a blinding vision of him whom the real atheist truly seeks. It is Christ who works in these souls. The Antichrist is not to be found primarily in the great deniers, but in the small affirmers, whose Christ is only on the lips. Nietzsche, in calling himself Antichrist, proved thereby his intense hunger for Christ. In searching through various ancient religious traditions, Father Seraphim once went to visit a Russian Orthodox church. Later, he wrote about this experience. For years in my studies, I was satisfied with being above all traditions, but somehow faithful to them. When I visited an Orthodox church, it was only in order to view another tradition. However, when I entered an Orthodox church for the first time, a Russian church in San Francisco, something happened to me that I had not experienced in any other Buddhist or Eastern temple. Something in my heart said that this was home, that all my search was over. I didn't really know what this meant because service was quite strange to me and in a foreign language. I began to attend Orthodox services more frequently, gradually learning its language and customs. With my exposure to Orthodoxy and to Orthodox people, a new idea began to enter my awareness. That truth was not just an abstract idea sought and known by the mind, but was something personal, even a person, sought and loved by the heart. And that is how I met Christ. On becoming Orthodox, Father Seraphim continued to despise the modern world and hoped for nothing from it. He wanted only to escape it. He felt no less, if not more, estranged from the Christianity that he had been raised in. For while that Christianity was at home in the world, his was radically otherworldly. He had finally found the designation of man's existence, and it was this: man is meant for another world. Father Seraphim was an ascetic. Father Seraphim's was an ascetic faith. He wanted a Christianity that emphasized not earthly consolation and benefits, but rather heavenly redemption through intense suffering on earth. No other kind rang true to him who had suffered so much, only a God who allowed his children to be perfected for heaven through suffering, and who himself set the example by coming to a life of suffering. Only such a God was capable of drawing the afflicted world to himself, and was worthy to be worshipped by the highest spiritual faculties of man. In his journal, Father Seraphim wrote, "Let us not, who would be Christians, expect anything else from it than to be crucified. For to be a Christian is to be crucified. In this time and at any time since Christ came for the first time, his life is the example and warning to us all. We must be crucified personally, mystically, for through crucifixion is the only path to resurrection. If we would rise with Christ, we must first be humbled with him, even to the ultimate humiliation, being devoured and spit forth by the uncomprehending world. And we must be crucified outwardly in the eyes of the world. For Christ's kingdom is not of this world, and the world cannot bear it, even a single representative of it, even for a single moment. The world can only accept Antichrist now or at any time. No wonder then that it is hard to be a Christian. It is not hard, it is impossible. No one can knowingly accept a way of life which, the more truly it is lived, leads the more surely to one's own destruction. And that is why we constantly rebel, try to make life easier, try to be half Christian, try to make the best of both worlds. We must ultimately choose. Our felicity lies in one world or the other, not in both. God, give us the strength to pursue the path of crucifixion. There is no other way to be a Christian. Before he had found the truth, Father Seraphim had suffered from lack of it. Now, having found it, he suffered for the sake of it. He devoted the rest of his life to living that truth and killing himself to give it to others. Together with a young Russian man named Gleb Podmoshensky, he formed a brotherhood which practiced the do it yourself philosophy. They opened a bookstore in San Francisco and began printing a small magazine by hand on a letterpress, refusing to become a dependent arm of the worldly church establishment. Later, partly to avoid this very establishment, they moved their printing operation to the wilderness of Northern California, where they began to live like desert dwellers, wilderness ascetics of ancient times. There was no running water on their forested mountain, no telephone, no electric. They built their buildings themselves out of lumber taken from old pioneer dwellings and hauled water on their backs up the mountain. They lived with deer, bear, foxes, rabbits, squirrels, bats, mountain lions, scorpions, and rattlesnakes. In 1970, they became monks, thus dying forever to the world. At this time, the church establishment tried to shut down their wilderness hermitage and make them standard pastors for parishes in the world. The two monks fought long and hard against this, and after much suffering achieved victory. In the wilderness, Father Seraphim's spirit began to soar. The city, he once said, is for those who are empty, and it pushes away those who are filled. The desert keeps those who are filled and allows them to thrive. Working by candlelight in his tiny cabin, Father Seraphim produced a great number of original writings and translations of ancient ascetic texts. In America, his writings have so far reached only select circles, but in countries formerly behind the Iron Curtain, they've had an incalculable impact on human lives. During the communist era, they were secretly translated into Russian and distributed in the underground press known as the Samizdat in the form of typewritten manuscripts. By the time of the fall of the communist power in 1991, Father Seraphim was known all over Russia. Today, his books are on sale everywhere in Russia, including book tables in the metro and on the street. The reason that he has made a much greater mark on Russia than on his own land is because in Russia people know how to suffer. Father Seraphim's message of underground Christianity, of suffering and persecution in this world for the sake of truth, touches a responsive chord in people who have already been crucified. In America, people would rather hear the nice messages of preachers like Reverend Robert Schuller, who, by the way, broadcast his show to Russia, where people can hardly believe how stupid it is. I met Father Seraphim a year and a half before his death in 1982. Like him, I'd been seeking reality through Eastern religions. By seeking to escape pseudo reality through a Zen like breakdown of logical thought processes. Finally, reduced to despair, I listened to Sid Barrett's two schizophrenic withdrawal childhood regression solo albums over and over until I had memorized all his word salads. In Russia, this is known as going crazy on a full stomach. Then one day, Father Seraphim came to the campus where I was going to school. He drove up in a beat up old pickup truck and emerged with his worn out black robe, his long hair, and his exceedingly long gray beard, which had become matted. I found out later that he had not taken a bath or a shower since becoming a monk 11 years before, which is a common monastic practice in Israel, Greece, and Egypt. But for some reason, he didn't smell. It was the image of absolute poverty. The next thing I remember is walking with Father Seraphim through the college. Dinner had just ended, and the students were milling and hanging around outside the cafeteria. Everyone was staring at Father Seraphim, but he walked through them as naturally as if he had been at home. In the middle of this progressive American college, he seemed like someone who had just stepped out of the 4th century Egyptian desert. Father Seraphim went to a lecture room and delivered a talk called Signs of the Coming of the End of the World. He happened to be sick at this time and sniffled through the lecture. Obviously exhausted, he remained clear headed, cheerful, and ready to answer questions at length. I could see that he was at least as learned and far more wise than any of my professors, and yet he was clearly a man of the wilderness, more at home in a forest than in a classroom. What struck me most about Father Seraphim was that here was a man who was sacrificing himself totally for God, for the truth. He was not a university professor receiving a comfortable salary. for being a disseminator of knowledge, nor was he a religious leader who hawkered after power, influence, or even a bowl of fruit to be placed at his feet, as did the spiritual masters who then had followings in the area. He was not into religion, for what could he get out of it? He was not looking for a crutch to enjoy spiritual life. He was just a simple monk who sought the truth above all else. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he would die for that truth, for I could sense that he was dying for it already. Those who had suffered immense pain in this world can believe far more deeply than those who have not, that there must be another world. Those who, like Father Seraphim, have felt themselves out of place in modern society, who have been devoured and spit forth by the uncomprehending world, can understand better Christ's radical call of rejection of the world and rebellion against it. Thus, it is not the accepted ones who can hear Father Seraphim's message, not of this world, and carry it to the end. Just as in the time of Christ, it is the outcasts who get the point. Even an atheist may be closer to God than a right believing one, if the former is suffering in his unbelief and the latter is smug and complacent in his belief. As Father Seraphim said, God is working in the souls of the great deniers more than in those of the small affirmers. As early as 1960, Father Seraphim had come to many of the conclusions that the punks of today had come to. He said that humanity, when divorced from God, naturally becomes subhumanity, and that humanism becomes subhumanism. Those artists and musicians who depict modern godless autonomous man as empty, despairing, enraged, and dehumanized hit closer to the truth than the naive, happy humanist who tries to look at the modern situation with optimism. A few years later, in 1962, Father Seraphim wrote an essay in which he traced the course that nihilism takes. Directed by the evil one, his words proved prophetic in subsequent decades. At the first stage of nihilism, he said, is liberalism, by which he meant the attempt to work out a compromise between the old order Christian civilization and the new order of humanity without God. At the second stage is realism, in which belief in the other world and transcendent truth is abandoned, and the whole concentration is on the material world, physical well being, technical progress, etc. Realism, however, denies man's unplanned irrational needs and therefore must evoke a reaction against it, which is the third stage, vitalism. In the vitalist stage, the criterion of truth is substituted by a new standard, the life giving, the vital. This may take form of pseudo spiritual experiences, invoking of powers and presences, or else of the cult of nature with its primary elements of the earth, the body, and sex. Vitalism, Father Seraphim said, is an unmistakable symptom of world weariness. It is also the product not of the freshness in life and immediacy its followers so desperately seek, precisely because they lack them, but of the corruption and unbelief that are but the last phase of the dying civilization they hate. Thus, Father Seraphim believed beyond vitalism there could be only one more definitive stage through which nihilism may pass, the nihilism of destruction. Here at last, he wrote, we find an almost pure nihilism, a rage against creation and against civilization that will not be appeased until it has reduced them to absolute destruction. And that's what we're seeing right now. The end is closer than we think. Since Father Seraphim wrote about this in 1962, the youth movements have tended to correspond with the stages he outlined. The hippie movement of the 60s and early 70s was an example of vitalism reaching against the dead liberalism and dry realism of the 50s, when science was expected to take care of everything. Conformity was the rule and spiritual seeking looked down upon. By the 80s and 90s, the ideals of the hippies had proved naive and simplistic, and their vitalism gave way to manifestations of nihilism of destruction in a now far more fragmented youth culture. This is where we are at today, and beyond it, Father Seraphim said, is anarchy. The nihilism of our times exists in all, Father Seraphim wrote, and those who do not, with the aid of God, choose to combat it in the name of the fullness of being of the living God, are swallowed up in it already. We have been brought to the edge of the abyss of nothingness, and whether we recognize its nature or not, we will, through affinity for ever present nothingness within us, be engulfed in it beyond all hope of redemption, unless we cling in full and certain faith, which doubting does not doubt, in Christ, without whom we are truly nothing. Facile interpretations of the crisis of the choice before us abound. To take either side of these illusionary interpretations is damnation. The true crisis is now, as it has ever been, within us. It is our acceptance or negation of Christ. Christ is our crisis. He demands from us all or nothing, and this problem he presents is the only one that need be answered. Do we choose God, who alone is, or ourselves, nothingness, the abyss, hell? Our age is founded upon nothingness, but this nothingness inexplicably to us presents, for those who can still perceive, the crisis of all men in all ages most clearly and unmistakably. Our age tells, if we can listen, to choose the living God. To save the world. Beauty Will Save the World by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Progress with its machines has made the world regress to a place where there is no beauty. If beauty is undermined, what will save the world? From the womb, we are taught that things detestable are attractive, and therefore the image of true beauty is deformed. Since there is no distinction between what is beautiful and what is deformed, the youth of today are left with chaos. We are told that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but if this were true, the world would never have a chance to be saved, for man's interpretation of beauty can be deadly. It is said that beauty is truth and truth is beauty, but truth can never be in the eye of its beholder. For to say this is to say that there is no ultimate truth, and there is no answer to the question why. In the past, mankind had a way to express true beauty, and to express man's seemingly confined soul, and to elevate it to its true state, which is beauty. This was done through the arts, through painting, literature, sculpture, drama, and music. The arts of the modern world have confused and deformed souls and no longer elevate them to a higher state. They only express the soul of modern man, which has fallen headlong into destruction, despair, and sorrow. This is due to man's fulfilling his earthly desires and forgetting his otherworldly calling. As the time presses on, it seems easier and easier to forget all that man was created for in the eyes of God. But we must not forget that many are called, but few are chosen to be not of this world. But Justin Marler, the end is closer than we think. Keep a remembrance of death. Remember that God is everywhere and fillest all things. And he loves you more than I could ever express. We try to run away from God and to give ourselves comfort in the fleeting things of this world which will rot and decay and be no more. But God is following us, and only if we stop and ask him to come into our heart and to help us with all that we're struggling with, he will be right there. We won't have to wait for him to catch up with us, because as we've been running this whole time away from him, he's been following behind, hoping like someone that's trying to find a lost child in the wilderness, that we would just stop and ask him for help, that we'd call out so he could hear us and be there and comfort us. God loves you all so much more than I could ever express. Talk to him, wring out your heart, and tell him all that you're struggling with. Thank you, brothers and sisters. It's getting late for me here in Alaska, fighting off this cold. I'm hoping I'm better by the time I wake up for liturgy. I love you all, and I hope to see you again. Thank you for being my family. God bless. Pray for the whole world. That way, everyone in the world will have someone praying for them.